My name is Harold Vance. I am 74 years old. For 37 years, I was a high school principal in Clarksburg, West Virginia. Before that, I taught ninth grade history for 9 years. I have been in rooms with angry parents, frightened teenagers, school board members who had opinions and no information, and visiting superintendents who had even more opinions and even less information. I have been in those rooms, and I have remained calm. That is not a brag. That is just a fact about what 37 years of that particular job will do to a man. I am not a dramatic man. I don't make speeches. I don't slam doors. I don't need the last word. I just need to be clear with myself about what something meant. Last July, at my wife Norma's family 4th of July cookout in Decatur, Illinois, something happened, and I got very clear. Norma and I have been married for 31 years. I want you to understand what that number means before I tell you the rest. 31 years of showing up. 31 years of driving the 3 hours to Decatur for the Beaumont family 4th of July. Thanksgiving, the birthday parties for cousins whose names I had to consult a handwritten index card to remember in the early years. I had that index card in my shirt pocket for the first 4 Thanksgivings. I'd written it out carefully in pencil. First names, ages, relation to Norma, and 1 or 2 details I'd picked up from previous visits, so I had something to ask about. Dennis Jr., Connie's oldest, played varsity basketball, wanted to study engineering. Rachel, same family, allergic to strawberries, loved horses, that kind of thing. I studied that card the way I used to study seating charts before the first day of school. Then I didn't need it anymore. That's what showing up does. It turns strangers into people you actually know. Norma's family is large the way old Midwestern families get large. Her mother, Patricia Beaumont, is 81 years old and lives in the same house she moved into in 1968. The house is a 2-story colonial on a quiet street with a front porch and a rose garden along the south side that Patricia has tended for 50 years. Norma has 2 sisters, Connie, who is 69, and Deborah, who is 65. There are 6 nieces and nephews between them, and as of 3 years ago, 11 great-nieces and great-nephews under the age of 12. That is a lot of birthday parties. I have attended most of them. I brought the same thing every year to every event. A bourbon pecan pie made from a recipe my own mother clipped from a magazine in 1974. It is a good pie. It requires specific attention. You brown the butter first, which most people skip, and you toast the pecans separately, which most people also skip, and you use a real bourbon, not cooking bourbon, not the bottom shelf, because you can taste the difference. Patricia Beaumont told me so in 1994, the second year I came, and I have been making it ever since. It takes 2 hours to make right. I don't mind. I have always thought that showing up with something you made yourself is different from showing up with something you bought. One is a transaction. The other is an act. Norma's family liked me fine. I want to be precise here. They did not love me the way you love someone who belongs to you. They like me the way you like a piece of furniture that has always been in the right place. You'd notice if it was gone, but you wouldn't mourn it. I figured that out around year 7 or 8. I didn't hold it against them. That is not a wound I carry. It is just information. Some people would have let that information change how much of themselves they gave. I didn't. That was a decision I made consciously, sometime around 1999 or 2000, sitting in Connie's living room at Thanksgiving, watching her kids chase the dog around the coffee table and thinking, I am here because I chose to be here, and that has nothing to do with whether they've noticed. You don't make a pie for the applause. You make it because the making of it matters. I want you to know that so you understand what the sentence cost. What changed on a Saturday afternoon, the 5th of July, 2024. The cookout ran a day late that year because the 4th fell on a Thursday was 1 sentence. We were on Connie's back porch. Connie had a new pergola sheet had built in May, and there were string lights up and a card table for the kids near the fence, and Norma's nephew Gerald was running the grill. Gerald is 43, an electrician, a good man. We've talked about the Mountaineers every year for 15 years. I know the names of his kids. I was at his father Raymond Jr.'s funeral in 2018. It was 4:47 in the afternoon. I remember because I had glanced at my watch thinking about the drive home. 3 hours in the dark is not my favorite thing at 74. The sun was still up, but angled low the way it gets in July in the early evening. That particular gold that makes everything look more peaceful than it is. Norma was talking to Connie near the pergola. I was sitting in a lawn chair about 8 feet away with a glass of iced tea, not particularly listening, which is my natural state at these events. I am present. I listen when spoken to. I don't insert myself into conversations that don't require me. That is a rhythm I found, and it worked for 31 years. What I heard Norma say was this: Harold doesn't have to come if he's tired. He's not obligated. Connie said, "Oh, of course not. We understand." That was it. 2 sentences, Norma's and Connie's. I heard them clearly because the pergola had a way of carrying sound back toward where I was sitting. I looked at my iced tea. There was a slice of lemon in it that had gone pale in the heat. I did not look up. I did not change my expression. I have spent 37 years not letting my face say what I'm thinking in real time. That skill does not go away when you retire. I thought Norma wasn't asked. She volunteered that. I thought Connie said we understand, not, "Oh, Harold loves coming." She already knew the answer. This had been discussed. I thought neither of them lowered their voice. I stayed another 45 minutes. I said goodbye to Patricia, who held my hand the way she always does, with both of hers. Her hands are small and her grip is firm, and she looked at me the way she usually does, directly, without ceremony. I loaded the empty pie dish into the back of the Buick. I drove home. The whole drive, I didn't turn on the radio. That is unusual for me. I usually have a baseball game on or one of the history programs I follow on AM. The quiet that night was not peaceful. It was purposeful. I needed to think without background noise. There is a kind of dismissal that comes dressed up as consideration. It says you don't have to. What it means is we've thought about it and decided you aren't really necessary. The sentence sounds kind. It is not kind. It is a release. And Norma had given it to me in front of her sister without asking whether I wanted to be released. I thought about the bourbon pecan pies. I thought about the index card with the names. I thought about 2009 when Norma's father had his first stroke, and I drove to Decatur on a Tuesday morning in February. Not a weekend, a Tuesday, which meant I had to arrange coverage for 3 classes and a disciplinary hearing I'd been preparing for. And I sat in a hospital waiting room for 11 hours with people who were not my family, and I did not complain, and I did not leave early. I was there until 9:03 that evening, when the doctor came out and said Raymond was stable. Norma cried, and I held her, and then I drove us both home, and then I drove back alone the next morning to pick up her car from the hospital lot. I thought about Roy's back surgery in 2015, and driving to Decatur in November for it, because Connie was frightened and Norma wanted to be there. I thought about Marcus, Deborah's son, the younger one, and the summer he had the trouble with his landlord, and Norma called me at work because he needed someone to talk to who'd been through a lease dispute. I spent 40 minutes on the phone with him, walking through what to document and who to call. I thought about all of it calmly, the way you take inventory, not with grievance. Grievance is a fog. This was clear air. I thought 31 years is a long time to be furniture. I did not say anything to Norma about it that night, or the next day, or the day after that. I am not the kind of man who leads with the wound. I've seen what that looks like. You say the thing, the other person offends themselves. You explain what you meant, they explain what they meant, and at the end of 2 hours you are both exhausted, and nothing has actually been resolved because nobody told the truth. I have been in those conversations. I ran a high school for 37 years. I sat in the center of those conversations more times than I can count. A parent and a teacher both wrong, both right, both too emotional to say what they actually meant. I learned to wait them out, let the water settle. Then you can see what's on the bottom. What I did instead was think clearly about what the sentence had told me. It had told me that Norma had already had a conversation, or several conversations, with her family about whether my presence was necessary. You don't volunteer that kind of permission to your sister unless the topic has come up. Harold doesn't have to come. The phrasing was too settled for it to be spontaneous. That had been decided somewhere I wasn't. Maybe at Thanksgiving last year, when I'd stepped outside with Gerald to talk about the game. Maybe at a phone call I hadn't been part of. maybe over a period of years, quietly, in a way that family decisions accumulate, not in one meeting, but in 100 small agreements that add up to a policy. I thought about this for 4 days. On the 4th day, I called my brother Dennis. Dennis is 71, retired Army, lives in Morgantown. He did 22 years, got out as a sergeant major, spent the next 15 working maintenance and logistics for a county school district up in Monongalia County. He knows what institutions are and what they cost you. He has been married to the same woman, Carol, who teaches Sunday school and makes a venison stew that I would drive 4 hours for 46 years. Dennis is not a man who offers opinions unless you ask for them. I have always respected that about him. I told him what Norma had said. I told him where we were sitting and that she hadn't lowered her voice. I told him about the 45 minutes I stayed after. I told him about the drive home without the radio. Dennis was quiet for a long moment. He does that. He lets you finish, and then he waits another beat, making sure you're actually finished. Then he said, "What are you going to do about it?" I said I wasn't sure yet, that I was thinking about it. He said, "You've been showing up to that family for 31 years. You know what they call a man who shows up that long." I said I didn't know. He said, "Reliable, and you know what reliable means to some people." I said, "Guaranteed." He said, "Yeah." We talked for another 20 minutes about other things. His near replacement in September, whether his granddaughter's soccer team had a shot at the state tournament. He coached youth soccer for 11 years after he retired from the Army, and he follows his grandkids' games the way some men follow the pros. Before he hung up, he said, "Hal, you don't have to decide anything dramatic. You just have to decide what you actually want to do." That was the right thing to say. Dennis usually says the right thing. It takes him a while, but he gets there. He has the patience that the Army gives you, and that civilian life sometimes takes back. But Dennis held on to his. I want you to understand what I have been doing for 31 years, because I think the number without the content doesn't mean much. Every 4th of July cookout, every Thanksgiving, which we alternated between my family and Norma's. But even in my family's years, I drove Norma to Decatur for the Saturday gathering, so she didn't miss it. Every Christmas Eve at Patricia's, because Christmas Day we spent home, but Christmas Eve was the Beaumont tradition, and I went. Connie's daughter Rachel's wedding in 2011, which I attended, and where I danced badly, but willingly and with good humor. Deborah's son Michael's graduation party in 2016, held in a rented pavilion at a park in Springfield, 2.5 hours from Clarksburg, and I brought a car with a check inside, and I shook Michael's hand and told him he had something worth protecting now, which is the only advice I know how to give to a new graduate. The niece's baby shower in 2019 that ran 4 hours, and where I was one of 2 men present, and I sat in a folding chair near the punch bowl, and did not complain, and made 3 separate trips to the kitchen to refill the ice. Patricia's 80th birthday dinner at a restaurant in Decatur last spring, a Sunday afternoon, 2.5 hours Italian food and family photographs, and I drove 6 hours round trip for it, and I was in every photograph because I was there, and I was glad to be. I have a rough count in my head. In 31 years, I estimate I attended somewhere between 190 and 210 Beaumont family events. I did not keep a ledger. I am keeping one now, but I didn't then, because a man who keeps a ledger of his own generosity is a man who has already started planning how to collect. I was not planning anything. I was just showing up. The pattern is what I want you to see, not the number, the pattern. I was reliable. And somewhere along the line, I can't tell you exactly when, maybe around year 12, maybe year 18, reliable became expected, and expected became invisible. The pie was always there, so nobody thought about the 2 hours it took to make. The browning butter and the toasted pecans and the real bourbon and the careful lattice crust I taught myself from a library book in 1996 because Patricia had once mentioned, in passing, that her mother used to make lattice pies. Nobody thought about the 3-hour drive. The Buick was always in the driveway by noon, so the fact that it got there became part of the background, like the furniture, like the string lights on the pergola. Present, unremarked upon. I think Norma forgot, over time, that these were choices. She saw them as facts. Harold comes. Harold brings the pie. Harold shakes hands with Gerald and talks to Patricia about her rose garden and sits quietly in his lawn chair and doesn't eat anything from anyone and goes home when it's time. What Norma didn't know, what I don't think she had considered, is that every choice I make consciously. I'm a retired principal. We don't do anything on autopilot. We just do it quietly enough that other people think we do. Every time I put on my jacket on a Saturday morning and made that pie and got in the Buick, I made a decision. I chose to be there. I chose it because I thought it mattered. I chose it because Norma is my wife and her family is, in some important sense, mine too, even if mine in the way of furniture rather than blood. But a choice that goes unrecognized long enough stops feeling like a choice. To the people around you, it starts to feel like gravity, like something that just happens. And when something feels like gravity, you don't thank it. You just count on it. And when you count on something the way you count on gravity, you don't think about what the world looks like without it until it stops. The moment when I knew for certain, not suspected, not thought, but knew, came on a Thursday evening, the 18th of July, 2024. I was sitting at the kitchen table at 9:47 p.m. Norma had gone to bed early. She often does in summer. She says the heat wears her out even when we're inside with the air running. The house was quiet except for the window unit in the back bedroom, which hums at a frequency I've cataloged in 11 years of listening to it. Low and even like a faraway engine. On the table in front of me was the white ceramic mug I've used every morning for 11 years. My daughter-in-law gave it to us as part of a set. Norma uses the other one. This one I claimed. It still had an inch of tea in it, gone cold. I was looking at my phone, not using it, just looking at it. Thinking about what it would look like in September, when Deborah's granddaughter turned 2 and there would be a birthday party in Decatur, and Norma would mention it in the way she always mentioned things. Not as invitation, but as information, assuming I would file it under my own calendar entries, and I would say I wasn't going. I thought about what Norma would say when I said that. I thought about what Patricia would think. Patricia Beaumont, 81 years old, who always holds my hand with both of hers when I leave, who told me the bourbon pecan pie was the best thing anyone had ever brought to her house. She didn't say it to compliment me. She said it the way old women say things they mean, plainly, while looking at something else. We had been standing in her kitchen, and she was wiping down the counter, and she said it to the counter, not to me. That is how you know a thing is true. I thought about whether stopping was fair to Patricia, who had done nothing wrong, and I thought, Patricia is the one person in that family who knew why I was there. She knew it was a choice. I could see it in the way she held my hand. Not with relief, the way you hold a hand of someone you've been worried about, but with recognition, like she was acknowledging something, like she saw it. That mattered, but it didn't change the arithmetic. I didn't know if stopping was the right thing. I knew it was the honest thing. And I have learned at 74 that honest and right are usually the same thing, even when honest is uncomfortable. Uncomfortable doesn't mean wrong. Comfortable doesn't mean right. I spent 37 years helping young people understand that, and I believe about my own life too. I turned my phone face down on the table. I picked up the cold mug. I drank the last of the tea. Then I rinsed the mug, set it in the rack, and went to bed. That was when I knew I had decided. I did not tell Norma immediately. I want to be precise about the timeline, because the timeline matters. The 5th of July was the cookout. The 18th of July was the kitchen table night. The first test came on August 3rd, when Norma mentioned that Connie was having her annual back-to-school gathering on August 24th, a casual afternoon thing, nothing formal, just family. The kind of event that barely registers as an event. Chips and dip on the porch, some of the grandkids running around. I had attended the last 8 of them. I said, have a good time. Norma looked at me. You're not coming? No, I said, I'm all right. I want to note the phrase I used. I'm all right. Not I'm tired. Not I don't feel well. Not I have something else going on. I gave her the truth without the explanation. She waited for more. I didn't offer more. That is not cruelty. That is precision. She went. I stayed home. I made myself a pot of soup, a chicken and white bean soup I've been making since 1987. Learned from a woman named Edith Garrison who taught home economics at the school for 21 years and brought soup to every staff meeting in winter without ever being asked. And I watched a documentary about the construction of the Hoover Dam, which I had been meaning to watch for 2 months. It was a fine Saturday. The house was quiet in a different way than it usually was on Saturdays. I noticed that. I sat with it. Norma came home at 6:30. She said the gathering was nice. She didn't ask again why I hadn't come. Then came September 14th, Deborah's granddaughter's second birthday party in Decatur. Norma mentioned on a Tuesday, 11 days before. Casual in passing. Over breakfast, the way she always mentioned things. I said, I'll stay home. Norma set down her coffee. Harold, I said, I'm not being difficult. I'm taking your family at their word. Enjoy the party. She looked at me for a long moment. I met her eyes and held them, not with hardness, but with steadiness. There's a difference. Hardness is a wall. Steadiness is just being present without flinching. Then she said, this is about what I said at Connie's. I said, I thought what you said at Connie's was very thoughtful. She didn't say anything else about it that night. She left for Decatur on the 14th. I stayed home. I spent the afternoon in the garage, working on a storage cabinet I'd been building since June, white oak dovetail joints, something I'd been meaning to do for a long time and kept putting off because of various weekends spent in Decatur. I worked from noon until 4:15. The garage smelled like sawdust and mineral oil. I could hear the neighbor's lawnmower 2 houses down, and a cardinal somewhere in the silver maple by the back fence. It was a good afternoon. Not triumphant, just good. October was when things shifted. There were 2 October events I did not attend. A family dinner on October 6th for Connie's husband Roy's retirement. Roy, who I had known for 28 years, who I had helped move a water heater with in 2011, and with whom I shared a standing opinion about the designated hitter rule, and a Halloween gathering at Deborah's on October 26th. After the October 6th dinner, Norma came home quieter than usual. Not sad, exactly. Thinking. She sat down at the kitchen table and said, Connie asked about you. I said, that was kind of her. Norma said, she wanted to know if everything was all right. I said, everything is fine. Norma said, Harold, I think you're making a point. I looked at her carefully. I said, I'm taking you at your word, Norma. You said I didn't have to come. I'm not coming. That's not a point. That's just what you said. She was quiet. Then she said, I said that so you wouldn't feel obligated. And there it was. I want to be careful here about how I describe what I was feeling. I was not angry. Anger is a thing that rushes in. What I felt was more like clarity, the kind that arrives when something you already knew finally gets confirmed in plain language. The ground doesn't shift. The fog just clears, and you can see exactly where you've been standing. I said, Norma, I have been driving to Decatur for 31 years because I wanted to, not because I felt obligated. If you thought I felt obligated, you didn't know why I was coming. And if you announced in front of your sister that I didn't have to, without asking me whether I felt obligated, then you made a decision about my presence that wasn't yours to make. She didn't answer. I said, I'm not punishing you. I'm just not going anymore. That was the longest speech I made in this entire situation. For sentences. I'm not sure all of it was even necessary. I could have stopped it too, but I think she deserved honesty over silence. So I gave it to her. She looked at the table for a moment. Then she got up and went into the other room, and I let her go, and we had dinner together 2 hours later without mentioning it again. That is the thing about a 31-year marriage. You learn how to let the water settle without abandoning the room. I want to say something about Norma, because this is not a story about a villain. I have been married to Norma Vance for 31 years, and I know her as well as a person can know another person. She is not a cruel woman. She is not calculating. She is not the kind of woman who makes moves on a board. What she is, and has always been, is a woman who learned early in life that things work better when you manage them quietly before they become problems. Her father, Raymond, was a difficult man, not unkind, but exacting the way men of that generation could be exacting. He expected things to run smoothly, and he noticed immediately when they didn't. Norma learned, growing up in that house, to notice the friction before he did, to smooth it, to move the pieces around so that nothing ever became a problem that had to be addressed out loud. She was good at it. She is still good at it. It is, in many ways, one of the things I admire about her. I think what happened at Connie's was Norma managing something she'd noticed, a tension, maybe, that she'd picked up on over the years, something unspoken about whether Harold really needed to be at every single event, a certain fatigue, perhaps, or a crowding that happened naturally in a family that large when you had a non-blood spouse to every gathering for 3 decades. And she managed it by offering the release valve. She didn't mean it as a dismissal. She meant it as a kindness toward everyone, toward her sisters, who maybe felt some of that crowding, and toward me, so I wouldn't feel pinned. She was solving a problem she diagnosed on her own, the way she always does. The problem is that kindnesses offered on someone else's behalf, without their knowledge, aren't really kindnesses. They're decisions. And Norma made one about me without consulting me. She decided, somewhere in her quiet management of the family, that my presence was an obligation I might want release from. She decided that without asking me whether I felt obligated. And the answer was, I didn't. I never had. Not once in 31 years. Dennis put it better than I could when I told him about the October conversation. He said, she managed you the same way she manages them, and you're the first one to notice. The call I expected came on November 3rd, 2024, at 11:22 in the morning. It was not from Norma. It was from Patricia Beaumont. Mrs. Beaumont is 81 years old. She goes to bed by 9 as a rule. She does not call before 10 in the morning. 11:22 was practically the middle of her day. She said, Harold, I want to ask you something directly. I said, all right, Mrs. Beaumont. She said, are you all right? Are you and Norma all right? I said, I'm fine. Norma's fine. She said, you haven't come since July. I said, that's right. She was quiet for a moment. In that moment, I could picture her exactly. Sitting in the chair by the front window in her living room, the one she's had for 30 years, with the rose garden visible through the glass. She is a woman who chooses her words the way a careful carpenter chooses wood. She doesn't waste them. She said, I miss the pie, Harold. I said, I'll bring you one at Christmas, Mrs. Beaumont. She said, I'd like that. There was another pause. Then she said very quietly, the way old women say the things that matter, not loudly, not with drama, but with a plainness that makes them land harder than any speech. I want you to know I never thought you had to come. I always thought you wanted to. I sat with that for a moment. I said, I know, Mrs. Beaumont. That's why I'm telling you I'll bring the pie. We talked for another 10 minutes about her rose garden. The knockout roses had done well this fall, she said, and she was going to try a new variety in the spring, a David Austin she'd seen in a catalog, though she had concerns about its winter hardiness in Zone 5. I told her to mulch heavily in November, and she said she already had, and I said then she was probably fine. When we hung up, I sat for a moment with the phone in my hand. Patricia Beaumont understood the difference between obligation and choice. She had always understood it. That is why, when I leave her house, she holds my hand with both of hers. Not because she's afraid I won't come back, because she knows I chose to come in the first place, and she's acknowledging the choice. Patience is the only currency that matters in a long game. And the thing about a long game is that you don't always get to choose who pays attention at the end. Norma and I have not had the large conversation yet. I want to be honest about that. We are still married. We live in the same house. We eat dinner together 4 nights a week. We are not at war. We are at a different kind of quiet. The kind that happens when 2 people are both thinking about the same thing and neither one of them is ready to fully open it yet. The quiet has its own weight. Not unpleasant, exactly. More like the stillness before a change in weather. You can feel the pressure building. You know something is coming. You just go about your day and wait for it to arrive. She has stopped mentioning the Decatur events before they happen. I have stopped waiting to be mentioned. There is an accommodation that has formed itself without either of us designing it. I am not sure if that is progress or avoidance. Probably some of both. Christmas is coming. I told Mrs. Beaumont I'd bring the pie. And I will. I have already thought about how it will work. I will go separately from Norma on my own timing, for my own reasons. I will bring the pie because Patricia Beaumont is 81 years old, and she held my hand and said the right thing, and there is nothing in the world that would make me withhold a pie from a woman who did that. But I will go as Harold Vance, who made a decision about what his presence means. Not as Harold Vance, the husband who shows up. That is a different thing. I'm not sure Norma will understand the distinction. I'm not sure I need her to. It is February now. Specifically, February 8th, 2025. I am sitting on the back porch of our house in Clarksburg in a wool sweater that I have owned since 2003. I bought it at a shop in Pittsburgh. The winter, we took a trip up for Norma's birthday. It is olive green, and it is starting to thin at the left elbow, and I have no interest in replacing it. It is 38 degrees, and I have a cup of coffee in my hand, and I can see my breath. I do this on Saturdays. I have done it for years, long before any of this. The porch is mine in a way that no room inside the house fully is. I put the chair here. I chose the angle, facing southeast, so the morning light comes at you sideways, not directly, which is better for thinking. Norma thinks it's too cold, but she's never told me to stop. That is a small kindness I have always noticed. The white oak cabinet I built last fall is finished. It's in the garage. I moved it in from the workshop in November, and I've been looking at it ever since. It is 4 feet wide and 6 feet tall, with 3 shelves and a lower section with a door. Dovetail joints, hand-cut, which took me 2 weeks longer than using a jig, but which are cleaner and tighter than anything a machine makes. The wood has a particular quality in this light, a warmth that white oak develops when you finish it right, when you go slow the oil and let each coat cure before you apply the next. It took me from June to November, working on weekends when I was in Decatur, and then working on every weekend after July. 6 months of Saturdays and some Sunday afternoons. I don't know if I would have finished it otherwise. Some projects need the time they need, and the time has to come from somewhere. I think about the 31 years a lot, and I try to do it clearly. I don't want to rewrite them into something they weren't. They were good years in most of the ways that matter. I showed up because I wanted to. That was real. Norma's family, for all their limitations, is not a bad family. Patricia is a good woman. Gerald is a good man. Even Roy, whose retirement party I missed, is a fundamentally decent person who moves water heaters when you ask him and argues about baseball in good faith. I am not going to pretend now that I was suffering through those 200 events, because I wasn't. I was present, and I was glad to be present, and most of the time it was fine. But there's a particular kind of reckoning that comes when you realize the people you showed up for didn't fully understand why you were there. Not a dramatic reckoning. Nothing breaks. Nothing burns. It's quieter than that. It feels like the moment after a very long project is complete, when the workshop goes still and you can finally see the whole thing in the light. You look at it and you think, this is what I made. You look at it and you think, I made this because I chose to, and the choosing was mine whether or not anyone was watching. And then you decide what you choose next. Norma has been in the house behind me the whole time I've been writing this. I can hear the radio through the back door. She listens to public radio on Saturday mornings, the weekend edition, the puzzle segment, whatever documentary they run in the late morning. She has done that for 31 years. I know the sound of it the way I know the sound of my own breathing. There are mornings when I can hear from out here the back doors cracked, just a murmur of it, the particular quality of public radio voices. I have always found it a comforting sound. I still do. I don't have a clean ending for you. I'm not that kind of man. What I have is a cabinet in the garage that is the best thing I've ever built. A pie I'll deliver to an 81-year-old woman sometime before the holidays next year. A porch where it's 38 degrees, and I can see my breath over my coffee. A brother in Morgantown who says the right thing eventually. A marriage that is 31 years old and still intact, and is currently in the process of being renegotiated, without either party formally declaring that that's what is happening. I'd say that's about right for 74. You stop expecting everything to resolve cleanly. You stop waiting for the moment when all the accounts balance and everyone understands what happened, and you can file it away finished. That moment doesn't always come. People don't always understand. The accounts don't always balance. What you can do is be clear about what you will and won't do and why, and carry that clearly going forward. And the strange thing, the thing I didn't expect, The thing I would not have predicted if you'd asked me sitting in Connie's backyard at 4:47 on the 5th of July is that being clear feels more like peace than any of the showing up ever did. Not because the showing up was wrong. It wasn't. But because I spent 31 years giving something I'd chosen to give. And for most of that time, the choice was invisible. Even to me, after a while, it had just become what Harold does. Now I know what Harold does and why. And I decide it fresh each time. That is a different kind of showing up. Slower, more deliberate, maybe harder to sustain. But when you set something down in a light and look at it honestly, the grain of it, the joints, the way the finish caught, and you can say I made this thing by choice, and the choice was mine and I stand behind it, that is the most honest thing I can tell you.